Greetings, everyone. My name is Della. I'm an author and community organizer based in the Toronto area, and I focus on educating the Black community on Pan-Africanism, ancient history, anti-Blackness, socioeconomics, and how all those topics are interconnected. I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's degree in journalism, and I wrote my first book, 166 Days of Excellence, which is a calendar guide of heroic and courageous figures and events related to worldwide liberation advancements that are not normally taught in schools. The topic for this PowerPoint presentation is the historical foundation of systematic anti-Blackness in Canada, which was inspired by the book Policing Black Lives by Robyn Maynard, State Violence in Canada from Slavery to Present. I was motivated to do this four-part series to help educate not just Black people living in Canada, but everyone interested in independent studies that is purposely not taught in schools. I wanted to create an easy to follow timeline because this is the first book of its kind pertaining to history in Canada, and it was only written in 2017. I think it's very important to understand how systematic anti-Blackness works to build meaningful solutions for the Black community. As Black people, we are targeted, or at least know someone who has been targeted by some form of anti-Blackness, but just because we have been targeted doesn't mean we fully understand why and how we are targeted. Consider this example. If a stranger punched you in the face and attacks you, hopefully, I would hope your urge is to fight back and defend yourself. But just because you have the desire to fight back doesn't mean you know how to fight or you know how the stranger fights. If you have no knowledge in self-defense, you will only apply yourself to the first thing that comes to your mind in a reactionary emotional state. You can't stop the fight to learn how to fight. So the best time to train how to fight is anytime before it actually happens. But you will never know if a fight will happen. If you stay ready, you won't have to get ready. So in the context of anti-Blackness, education helps us understand how we are attacked so we can effectively build long-lasting solutions of defense. So before I get started, this presentation is dedicated to my publisher, Desiree Crooks, who transitioned in August to the spiritual realm, who fought against ovarian cancer. She was dedicated to teaching children, and she published a children's book on the liberation story of Queen Nzinga. And she was on the verge of actually opening up a daycare before the pandemic struck. I was blessed to have known her and published my first book with her, 166 Days of Excellence. So without wasting any more time, I'm going to jump into today's presentation. The historical foundation of Canadian systematic anti-Blackness, and we are on week 4, the final presentation, the wealth gap. I'm going to repeat this quote from Neely Fuller Jr. for the last time. The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook/workbook for thought, speech, and/or action for victims of racism, aka white supremacy. If you do not understand white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. The purpose of this presentation is to give the Black diaspora the context and historical framework on how systematic anti-Blackness was founded in Canada. The term anti-Blackness is interchangeable with white supremacy. Anti-Blackness at its core includes white supremacy and also encompasses non-white and even Black people, whether conscious or subconscious, who carry negative thoughts, attitudes, speech, and/or behavior that only serves to maintain white supremacy or anti-Blackness over Black people. The learning objective is to learn the current result of all systematic pillars of racism in Canada through enslavement, segregation, education, immigration, labor, media, mass incarceration. So the modern result of the wealth gap. So week 1, week 2, week 3, we went through enslavement and segregation, labor and immigration, criminalization and sexualization of Black identity. So just to quickly recap, first records of enslavement in early Canada began in 1628 and ended in 1833. Enslavement was mainly practiced through private ownership, segregation practices through education, housing, and labor. Second-class citizenship existed for Black and Indigenous people. Immigration and labor opportunities were restricted from Black immigrants. Europeans were welcomed with open arms. These immigration and labor policies were an extension of enslavement and segregation. Immigration policies were based on racist attitudes towards Black people as hypersexual criminals. Black people faced longer sentencing rates compared to white people for the same crime. Former Prime Minister John A. Macdonald, politicians, news media, minstrel shows, and the 1950 movie Birth of a Nation have all contributed to distorting the image of Black people in Canada. Canada's multicultural identity wasn't instituted till 1970s onward. Canadian media and entertainment was complicit in destroying the image of Black people by hypersexualizing them as criminals, prostitutes, and rapists. So this is going to be a quick presentation. It's going to be more so analyzing the data because there's not much history involved with this presentation. So we're going to be looking at a lot of charts. We're going to be looking at a few articles. So this is actually from Policing Black Lives. Since the beginning of the 1980s, poverty levels in Canada and across the global north have been steadily rising. So this is the visible minority population from 1981. I actually forgot to mention this in one of the previous, in the labor and immigration presentation, that this percentage of 5 virtually stayed the same from 1960 all the way into 1981. So even just after 1962, when they removed references of race from the immigration policy, it did not really affect immigration for about 20 years, and not until 1986 is there a growth in immigration. That's when we start to see this is like really 1986 is when it really eased up, when they decided to really ease up on immigration. So yes, I just wanted to add that because I forgot to say that, because in 1961 it was 5% as well. So this is from the Toronto Star. Canadians who identify as visible minorities do not have the same access to investments and other sources of wealth as non-racialized people, suggests a new report on income inequality that looks at the financial impact of racism beyond jobs and wages. The growth of income inequality is undermining the promise that diversity is our strength, and that's a problem, said United Way President Danielle Zanota. In the 1980s, Toronto was dominated by middle-income neighborhoods. In the 1980s, Toronto was dominated by middle-income neighborhoods, said Holchansky, who has tracked Toronto's 3 cities of high, middle, and low-income areas since 1970. But now those neighborhoods make up just 29% of the city, while almost half of Toronto's census tracts 48% are low income, where residents bring in between 60% and 37% of the average GTA income. So from a Nursity article from 2020, you now have to make 135K a year to be considered middle class in Toronto. And this figure, 135K, is for families. The median after-tax income of all Canadian families and unattached individuals was 62,000 in 2019. For non-senior families, where the highest income earner was under 65 years of age, the median after-tax income was 93,000 in 2019, and that was from StatScan. I'm gonna have all the sources to all the presentations in a Word doc that's gonna be part of the presentations. I'm going to have all the PowerPoints and all the webinars accessible with all the sources. So these articles you'll be able to find in the sources. And so looking at this, talking about the median, I just wanted to show with these two specifically, because this of the 135K is 135K is a new figure that we haven't really heard of before. So it's just showing the growing disparity between in the wealth gap. And this median, I thought it was interesting to put both of these numbers, because the median after-tax income of Canadian families is 62,000. But then when you look at non-senior families, then it's 93,000. So essentially anybody who's still currently working, which is most of the population, even with that, you could see the gap between the non-seniors and basically all Canadian families. Whites are also overrepresented in middle income neighborhoods, where the average income is 49,000. Money buys choice, and people with the most choice are choosing to live in certain areas, Holchansky says, explaining the disproportionately high concentration of white residents in high and middle income communities. So when we're looking at these three different charts, low income, middle income, and high income, whites are 73 in high income neighborhoods. And we see that black is a sliver of 3%. And just so everybody knows, a lot of these articles are old. This one is from, yes, 2016. So just so everybody's aware, I mean, for the most part, these numbers haven't changed for white people. If anything, it might have grown. But this is the earliest data that we do have in terms of showing these disparities. And there's going to be other graphs as well too to really paint a very broad picture. So in high income, whites are 73%, black is only 3%. We look at middle income, whites are 61%, and black is still 5%. And then when we look at low income neighborhoods, black is 13% and white is 31%. And the reason that is because white people is a bigger population than black people in Canada. And then we look at some of the other races as well, Chinese, South Asian, and other, and them too, they have bigger populations than black people. Black people is the third largest ethnic group in Canada. It is Chinese and then South Asian, And then we have Black people as the third largest. That does need to be taken into consideration, but we also have to take into consideration that Black people have been in this country longer than Chinese and South Asian, and pretty much everybody else as well. And when you take into consideration the immigration policies that stopped Black people from coming into this country, that will affect the numbers as well too. Because once they pretty much opened up the floodgates, South Asian and Chinese came in and quickly became the number one, the largest ethnic groups in Canada. But all this needs to be examined because Black people were here before everybody else, and Black people continue to represent low income neighborhoods by a great proportion. So all of these different factors need to be taken into consideration, like the history and everything. We can't just look at the numbers and just take it as face value. So discrimination is not at the same level as in the United States, Ho Chansey says, but that doesn't make it any better for those who face that problem here. The analysis shows about 25% of racialized people earned income from investments in 2015, while nearly 31% of non-racialized Canadians received money through investments that year. That average amount earned was 7,700 for racialized people and 11,000, almost 500 for white people. People in affluent neighborhoods have networks, technology, peers, and colleagues they can use in a time of need, Pultranchek said. But people in our area don't have those networks. Their next door neighbor doesn't know how to help them. Their brother doesn't know either because he's in the same sort of situation. High levels of income inequality are linked to many social and economic problems, including lower levels of trust, decreased concern between people from different backgrounds, higher rates of violence and mental illness, and unstable economies, the report notes. And not to say that there isn't people succeeding in the Black community. I don't want to paint the picture that nothing is going on, that it's all despair. And I mean, from we see from the chart, it's only a fraction of people who are able to break barriers into the highest income in Ontario. But we still have to acknowledge and recognize the history that has caused this to happen, because we shouldn't be at the very bottom if we were here since the beginning. We should have affluent neighborhoods as well. We should have affluent networks, affluent areas that we can go to get the resources that we need on our own. We shouldn't have to ask the government for funding or any resources. But when we look at the history and see why exactly we are in the position we are in today, it's very clear that there's been systematic problems even after enslavement and segregation. There still continue to be systematic problems that we are still feeling the effects of till today. So definitely there's people succeeding, but that sliver of 3% is not enough to effectively change and effectively impact the rest of the middle and lower class, because the numbers is there's a gap with that in itself between the higher class Black people and the lower class Black people. That's a gap in itself. So when we look at how white people overrepresent high income, they have so many people in high income that they could affect more people. average income by racialized status from 1980 to 2015. So racialized essentially is everybody that's not white. And then we look here from 1980. So remember in 1980, there was only 5% of the population was a minority, meaning everybody who was not white. And then, so we're looking at this graph and it steadily goes up. This is the average income. So it steadily goes up pretty much almost 50,000. And when we look at racialized, it's essentially, we can't even, well, yeah, it's somewhat of a line. It's stagnant. It's moving sideways. It's not moving up or down. It's just moving sideways. It's just kept the same. I'm sure there's a lot of discussion and analysis on why that is, but it's not a problem for white people in this country. They're steadily going up. And I'm sure if we looked at more current data, it will show that they have continued to go up. I mentioned that Narcity article with 135K being the new middle class now. So I wouldn't doubt that it's continued to go up, and just barely impacting racialized people as we go sideways. We see from 1980 to 2015 is a 60% increase. And for racialized people, it's a 1% increase. Virtually nothing has changed. So income distribution in Toronto by race. This is a little fuzzy, so I'll try to explain it the best way possible. So we have upper class, middle class, lower class. We have, this was 2005. Let me see. So 2005, then this graph was 2016. So remember, Black people were 3% in high income neighborhoods. Okay, so we look at this graph. So this is the city of Toronto. And this was, yes, this was also the city of Toronto. Okay, so see, Black, it was 3%. It basically looks around 3%, staying the same. And then middle class, just over 30%. And then we have lower class, just over 60%, essentially. So then we go to white. White have a higher representation in middle class. And then upper class it looks to be above 20%. And their lower class is actually more than their upper class. It looks to be closer to 30%. And then, of course, we have Chinese and South Asian as well. So South Asian is 70%, and Chinese is just over 50%. And some people, you know, it's important to know how to analyze the data, right? So somebody might say, oh, the South Asians are doing worse than Black people in terms of lower class, right? Because they're 70, we're about 62, 63 as of 2015. But like I said, South Asians have a bigger population than Black people do, right? So this is why we have to, when we're looking at data, we have to look at the history so we'll be able to better analyze. So that's why history will always be one of the best tools to analyze how to fix solutions and how to look at data like this and really understand what exactly is going on. Yes, we can move forward now. So average income, so not a visible minority, about 50,000. In the Black population, 35,000. So when we're looking at, yes, this graph here, in 1980, it was 47,000, right? This was, I forgot what year this was exactly, but this was part of an article that had 5 different charts. So it is in the sources, but I'm not 100% sure what year this was. But all these are from the Toronto Star, these charts. So average employment income, those age 25 to 64. So we looked at the racialized female and the racialized male. Then we have the white female and the white male. So this is more so a looking at patriarchy and how patriarchy plays a role in income inequality as well. So we look at the racialized female. There's a huge gap between the racialized female and the white male. Black Canadians, so average total income. Black Canadians make less annual income than non-racialized Canadians, both for new immigrants and third generation Canadians. So we're looking at this. So when they say not a visible minority, they're essentially talking about white people. So for the Black population, it's even first generation. For some reason, the second generation and third generation is doing worse than the previous generations. When we're looking at white people, when they start off at 50K, go up to 55K, and essentially looks like they go lower for third generation down to about, I would say that's a 49K from 51 first, 57 second, and then 49 third. Just when we're looking at the cost of living going up and all those different factors, the cost of living going up, food going up, the cost of housing going up and that sort of thing, it's I could see why it's like a rainbow essentially. We're looking at the Black population. So essentially, if it's harder for white people, the later generations to do better than the previous generations, then how is the Black population expected to grow when the growth hasn't been shown? The growth there's no growth, there's only sideways movement, right? So that has to be taken into consideration as well, that essentially generation from generation is just making the same amount of money. And I'm sure a lot of analysis can be put into that as well too. So this is a very broad chart. Percentage living in low income, 2015. So the Toronto average, it's about 20%. All immigrants, 23%. Children in male lone parent families, 24%. Self-employed, 24%. Recent immigrants from 2001 to 2010, 26. Visible minority, 26. Children, 26. Working age, 25 to 64. Did not complete high school, 31%. Then we have Black, 31%. Racialized children, 33%. So we have children at 26 and racialized children at 33%. One person household, 33%. So we look at children in male lone parent families, 24%, and then one person households, 33%. So we have Korean at 36. New immigrants from 2011 to 2016, 38%. Living in rental high-rises, 39%. Children in female lone parent families, 40%. Senior living in rental high-rises, 43%. Arab, 43%. West Asian, 46%. Newcomer children arrived 2011 to 2016, 47%. And children living in rental high-rises, 49%. So a lot of information with this infographic. There is asterisks, which will I don't have the conditions that they have set, but it is in the article. So the richest 1% of Canadians made 15 times more than the average Canadian made in 2010. And in 1980, the ratio was 9 times. How does your city rank? So the richest 1% of Canadians made 15 times more, and in 2010, and in 1980, it was only 9 times. So now this chart shows the ratio of incomes of the richest 1% to the richest of us in cities across Canada. So across all of Canada is 15% in 2010, but it's varying multiplications for each region. So in Calgary is 26, Toronto is 23, Vancouver 18, Montreal 15. So Montreal 15 is the average. Then we have Regina 13, Winnipeg 12, Halifax 11, Ottawa 11. Unemployment rate, Black Canadians are far more likely than non-racialized Canadians and other visible minorities to be unemployed. So other visible minorities is 5.7, while Black population is at 12.5. This is as of 2016. So now disposable income. I put this chart because this shows, I think this is a great way to show disposable income, and not just for something useless, for something constructive in terms of parents providing for their children in recreational sports. So this is the average cost of signing up your children for hockey. So we have registration fees at $750, hockey camps about $300, accommodations for tournaments about $300, travel to games about $300. Other equipment, $250. That's for the day-to-day playing. Travel to tournaments, $218. Skates, about 200. Sticks, about 150. Additional ice time, about 100. Team apparel, jackets, hats, about 68, accommodations for games, about 65, and then other 154. I don't know how they came up with other, maybe food or something, not 100% sure, but essentially everything comes up to about $3,000. I wouldn't say this is per year, but definitely a lot of these expenses are reoccurring. Other than the helmets, like the equipment stuff, the skates, I guess the apparel. Definitely most of this stuff is reoccurring. And even with the equipment too, the equipment is not gonna last forever. So I would say I'm not a hockey expert, but I would say every few years it would the equipment would have to be replaced. If a child changes teams or something, they would have to get new jerseys and that sort of thing. So like even with the equipment too, it's not gonna last forever, right? So a lot of this stuff will be reoccurring payments. Essentially, if a child is signed up from the earliest age, we could say 5, 6, 7, all the way up until high school, that's more than 10 years of these types of expenses. And that just goes to show when we look at recreation in the Black community, essentially what we really have is basketball, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to get your child signed up into some type of recreational basketball. The most equipment that would need to be bought would be shoes and a basketball, maybe a basketball hoop to practice at home, but basketball hoops are very, very accessible, so that's really not needed. But in terms of disposable income, I think this was very important to show because Black families don't dominate hockey leagues. White families dominate hockey leagues. So Dr. Claude Anderson, author of Powernomics and Black Labor, White Wealth. I added Dr. Claude Anderson because he is one of the few people that we have that has gone into the education system and came out with various credentials and decided to come back to help the Black community. We will be getting into more of his credentials later on, but I feel like this part, even though he does talk about America, I feel like this part is very essential to the topic of the wealth gap because the wealth gap is nothing new. Actually, the idea of the wealth gap comes from the United States. So despite Black America's 280 billion in disposable income, Anderson says, Black people as a group remain impoverished because only 2% of our total income growth remains in the Black community. What makes Anderson's book provocative is the way he takes on the popular myth that Black people contributed little or nothing to creating this nation's wealth and power. Painstakingly, he details how the labor of Black people from the time of enslavement until today helped to lay the foundation for the nation's current well-being. But he notes that the increasing reliance on computers and immigration labor has all but ended white society's dependence on Black muscle power. Essentially, what I just read from the Washington Post, speaking on his words, is nearly verbatim of the history in Canada. Canada got its wealth off of the back of slaves and labor. Canada continued to keep opportunities for European immigrants. They gave the lowest paying jobs, the lowest quality lands, the most dangerous jobs to Black people. When we created Africville, they destroyed Africville. Right now, Africville should be an affluent neighborhood, right? So, what all this in terms of the history between the United States and Canada is very similar when we're looking at wealth, labor, capitalism, to be specific, and the current state of the nation. Africans in Canada and Indigenous is the reason for Canada's well-being, because the land was took, and from enslavement and then segregation. I mean, I'm just going to continue on because I'm just going to let Dr. Claude Anderson really speak for himself, because he could explain it 100 times better than I could. So this is going to be about a 15-minute presentation, and this will end off the presentation on the wealth gap.
Hello, don't you dare touch that mouse. You are right where you are supposed to be, and that is on the Powernomics YouTube channel. I'm Dr. Claude Anderson, probably your only Black forensic historian in this nation. Today I got a couple of things I want to talk to you about. First of all, to let you know that I'm here to do what's never been done, and that is to connect the dots between where Black folk are, what got them where they are, and what's been keeping them where they are. And we're going to start by giving you the right data and the right understandings. Now, my first commitment is something I learned years ago as a young man. Back as a young man, I said to myself once, in looking at some historical documents, that I'm going to do something to try to take care of the most beaten, enslaved, Jim Crow, maldistributed people in the world, and that is the Black people in this nation. They've been beat up on by every generation, of every ethnic group, every religious group, every cultural group, every language group. Everybody has exploited, misused, and enriched themselves off of Black folk. So I said to myself, I got to do something. And the first thing that I said I was going to do, when I looked around, I saw a picture of a praying Black slave. And what he was saying is that he said, I pray that one day there shall rise among my people a warrior who would know our suffering and would be able to fight our battles. Well, I'm here. I might not be that warrior, but I am going to try to fight Black folks' battles. I made a commitment to myself back in those days to say, anytime I get a chance, I'm going to try to bring some justice to those beaten, underclass, subordinated, and lynched, castrated, misused, and abused people called Black Americans. Now, when doing that, I said, how should I go about doing it? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get as much education as I could. And so I was blessed. I earned about 6 college degrees, everything from social economics to politics to education and to business. And I'm very proud of those accomplishments. Then I said, now how do I best use those things? Or how do I get any blessings or return for having acquired all these different degrees? It happened just like I anticipated and was delighted to have happen. And that is, I got appointed, first of all, to some of the best positions a man could ever have. In education, for instance, I got a chance to teach every grade level from the elementary school levels to high schools, to junior colleges, and to 2 or 3 universities. And lastly, I got a chance to be appointed to be over education for the state of Florida for about 7 years, from 1970 to 1977. That was a very unique appointment. Governor Robyn Maynard appointed me to be over everything in education in the state of Florida. That's from the elementary school all the way to the graduate schools in both the private sector and in the public sector. That was very special, and I enjoyed doing that. And I tried to bring some justice and some better educational opportunities for Black folk and Black children in the state of Florida. Next thing I knew, I said, now what else am I going to get for having acquired all these different degrees? Then ironically, I was appointed to be the first Black in the history of the nation to ever be to manage a presidential election for Jimmy Carter. I was Jimmy Carter's campaign manager in the South and in Florida. I didn't say I was I was participating in a political campaign, like passing out literature or knocking on doors. I was an actual manager, a black man managing the presidential election. Following that, I also had a chance to be the deputy political strategist for Bill Clinton in Maryland. As I made twice, I had those opportunities to be a manager for presidential elections. Secondly, I got a chance to run political campaigns for attorney generals, for governors, for mayors, for state legislators, and for general elections for school board members. And so I got a chance to understand the real nature of politics. So I appreciated that. But most importantly, because of my running the campaign for Jimmy Carter, I got the chance to be the first Black appointed to Assistant Secretary in the United States Department of Commerce and be a sub-cabinet member for a president. In that position, I also got a chance to operate. That's something no Black had done before, and that was to operate as a advisor and a director and a chairman for economic development for governors in the southeastern states, and advocated and advised them in developing economic opportunities in the southeastern states, period. I head up trade missions for the governors in the South, in the Caribbean, in Africa, and also in Europe. And so that was a very unique opportunity. Also in that position, with the president, I had a chance to also be able to over the surplus property program for the federal government, where my signature alone, I could sign a piece of paper and give away surplus property to anybody I wanted, anything that the government had. All I needed was to get the serial numbers of that property. I had 45 member staff down in Charleston, South Carolina. And that was a very unique opportunity. It allowed me to have a chance to appoint and to push through the election or the appointment of 3 Black federal judges. And so I appreciate those opportunities. And when I left that administration,
in this, what I would call like a new vision for Black economic prosperity, how do we make attempts to counteract, this racism, this classism?
mm-hmm.
How do we counteract it? And if we are to create a new paradigm?
It's very easy, Sheldon. That's a good question, Sheldon. You gotta do everything you can to learn how to acquire wealth. And what is wealth? Wealth is the result of labor. You cannot have wealth without having labor. Somebody provides the labor, somebody owns, and somebody increases or aggregates the wealth. Black people around the world have been the primary generators of labor. Whites have owned their labor. And what the problem is whether you're talking about in Africa, the Caribbean, or America, you had Black folk with the laboring class, but guess what? You didn't get any wealth. You know why? Because your labor was stolen from you. Nobody paid you for your labor. You weren't compensated from it. Whites got enriched off you around the world. And so consequently, they owe you. They owe you an indebtedness. They have stolen your wealth. There's no way you can compete without having wealth. What you own and control in the United States or in Canada will determine what your rights and opportunities will be. You got to get capitalism. Excuse me. Do not try to practice socialism in a sea of capitalism. Don't be the only people in the world, only group in the world trying to practice socialism in a capitalistic society.
Yeah, that's it. And those two things are incongruent, is I'm assuming from what you're saying. Is there a way for socialism to exist within capitalism?
Well, yeah. Well, see, originally in America, what white folks did, and I'm sure they did it in Canada too, they blended the two. But especially the best examples I can give you is in America. Whites in America, they got everything they got. You know how they got it? They didn't get it from capitalism initially. They got it from socialism. This country set up a social construct. And that strong construct was structured in the United States Constitution. But what I mean by that is the United States Constitution became the first affirmative action plan for people in America. But it was strictly for whites. It guaranteed white folk they can get wealth and power by coming to the United States. But they BS you by telling you, well, they came to the country for religious freedom or the right to vote. No, they came to America for 2 different things. They came to America to acquire free labor and free land. Same thing in Canada. They came in, that's socialism. They gave it to them. In the United States, as an example, Sheldon, in this country, United States gave whites in this country through socialism, gave them 2 billion acres of free land. Every white that came to America got 750 acres of land as soon as he set foot in the country. He got paid another 650 acres of land under what they call homesteading. And then for every slave he owned, he got another 150 acres. That is socialism.
Dr.
Everything
Anderson,
whites.
you
Go ahead.
just to kind of level the playing field in the conversation, I just want to point out to you that first things first, we're celebrating Canada Day on Monday, July the 1st. We're going to be celebrating our federation, our independence. And the father of Confederation, John A. Macdonald, proposed that Canada should be an Aryan nation. He made this proposal to the Parliament when he was initiating the Chinese Exclusion Act, and during the time that he was exterminating the indigenous people of the plains in order to replace them with imported Europeans. So
That's okay.
white supremacy was written into the policy of Canada during its inception.
That's right.
Right? John A.
That's
Macdonald
right.
went as far as to say that the mixing of races in Canada should be absolutely avoided, and he compared it to breeding a fox with a dog.
And a dog.
That it should not be done.
Right.
Well, that's the same they did in the United States. And see, and the only biggest difference between Canada and here in terms of your policies was that the British were the primary controllers and the distribution of slaves around the world. They were the chief slave owners in the world. And that means through the United States and Canada. And right now, I can't tell you how many trillions of dollars they own. And so you all have not been that distinctively different from how blacks in America were treated, the way you all treated them. You got a black overclass that practices race supremacy. Now you might, but you got to understand, what is white supremacists? White supremacists mean there's a period to it because what they own and control. If I were to come to Toronto right now and find up there that whites own and control all your buildings, your lands, your buildings, your shopping malls, your stores, your production centers, your media, communications, they are superior to you because they own and control it. Now, how are you going to get it back? You got to learn how to practice capitalism. That's why you get it back in Toronto.
So are you sure?
Elephant Room, where we have Dr. Claude Anderson as our guest today. We are talking about segregation, integration, black economics, powernomics, the Black History Reader, reparations, all kinds of things. But just before we went to break, we were talking about how our first prime minister was, pro-Aryan nation.
He actually used the term Aryan nation while he was addressing the Canadian Parliament.
Okay, but in spite of this Aryan nation that he wanted to have Canada rise with, we seem to pride ourselves on this fallacy idea that we are a multicultural nation, that we are diverse and inclusive. And this begs the question of, Dr. Anderson says no,
Shaking his head.
Well, this is why we want to jump into this idea of the segregation versus the integration and what was different. And if we could espouse upon that would be great.
Let me jump in real quickly. I know your time is of the essence up there. First of all, the issue, and I love for you and Sheldon to remember this, and you too, LA, don't let them trick you with that. The issue should never be whether you black folk want segregation or integration. That's a fool's wish. What you want is aggregation. Aggregation. They used to tell me back in the South a long time ago, Dr. Anderson, you're confusing us. You got Martin Luther King talking about integration, and you got Malcolm X talking about segregation. Which end of the stick do y'all want? I said, I don't want either end of the stick. I want to be able to have my people to come together anytime, any place, anywhere, and come together and pool their resources to be a competitive group. You don't ask Asians or Chinese or Middle Easterners or Latinos, do y'all want segregation or integration? They only ask black folk that because they want to confuse the issue. You tell them, no, you want ethno-aggregation. Remember that, ethno-aggregation, which means you can come together with any blacks, I don't care whether they're in Caribbean, Africa, anytime, and do things in your own self-interest. It's not your obligation to try to be blended in. If to blend you in neutralizes you, You're in a competitive race. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people. They're competing for the ownership and control of resources. Don't look for no equality in a race-based society. Not in America, not in Canada. You don't need no equality. The poor blacks in Toronto and Canada, you need to be above equality. You need more than that to compensate for how low down you've been for 460 years.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
For clarifying that.
thank you for
Much
clarifying
appreciated.
that. But you know,
Okay, so that is it for this piece. I will put together with everything this entire interview so you can digest it yourself. I did cut up a few parts. I cut out the intro and actually the first bit.
Hello, don't you?
The first bit, this was just an introduction that was on his own channel, so it had nothing to do with the interview. But I will be adding the interview so you could digest it. It's about an hour long, so you could analyze it and digest it on your own. It's not on YouTube, so you can't find it on YouTube. So that's why I will be adding it with this because I had downloaded it a while ago already. So it's unfortunately it's off of YouTube, but of course I still got it because a true researcher holds on to important pieces of information. But that is
Hello,
essentially
don't you dare touch that mouse.
it for the wealth gap. This is actually an hour long. I wasn't expecting it to be this long, but it's very powerful information that I wanted to have. So in conclusion, Canada has been calculated in their role in chattel enslavement and segregation. This laid the foundation for immigration, education, housing, and labor policies into a society shaped to be an anti-Black environment following enslavement. Policy systematically instituted second-class citizenship on Black Canadians while simultaneously privileging white Canadians. Canadian society has been just as calculated trying to erase their history of anti-Blackness by adopting multiculturalism. Canada is a common but separate structure, part of the worldwide ideology and practice of anti-Black oppression next to Brazil, Australia, and South America. Canadian media and entertainment has been calculated in their role in destroying the moral image of Black people. This led delusional fear and mass criminalization of Black people. White people justified their fears by believing that there was a threat of hypersexualization. Canadian society is guilty of passive and aggressive support of policies undermining Black independence and economic self-sustainability. The commitment to multiculturalism was only used and promoted to further displace Black Canadians and weaken group economics. Canada is just one brand partaking in the worldwide structure of anti-Blackness and oppression. Every government is united hand by hand in a united structure of anti-Blackness, but united in ideology oppressing Black people as bottom caste of society, same as Brazil, Australia, and Europe. So thank you for tuning in to this series. I hope you've learned a lot. I hope you've been taking notes, and I hope you'll reference this in your discussions about the history of Canada and what exactly is going on in Canada compared to the United States. As I said, it's not about if Canada is better or worse than United States. Canada is just different, but anti-Blackness is a global ideology. Whether all these governments are doing it in cahoots together or on their own, anti-Blackness is global no matter what. So I just want to thank you again for tuning in. If you want to help support me in creating more presentations like these and other topics, I'll leave a link to my book, 166 Days of Excellence, in the description box. Thank you for tuning in again. Until the next video.